So I went to go see 2 new movies this weekend, and those 2 movies happened to be Elvis and The Black Phone. Let me just be clear that before going to see these 2 new movies, I was not really interested in seeing them at all. If it weren't for my $25 a month AMC subscription, I probably wouldn't have given these a second thought. And that would have been a shame because at the end of the day, these 2 movies actually turned out to be pretty good. I'll first just talk about Black Phone for a minute since, why not? This is another movie that has been doomed again and again with constant delays for a while now. It had several dates last year and it was only until now that we finally got to see it in the theaters. Was it worth the wait? Well, not really, but it's still pretty good time overall. For a movie that's only an hour and 40 minutes long, it's a little slow and isn't afraid to take its time to get to certain parts of the movie. Like the beginning of the movie is basically a montage of these middle school kids, I think, playing baseball and casual school activity. And during that, we also get introduced to some of the characters as well. In particular, the main sibling protagonists, Finney and Gwen Shaw. After recent reports of children missing in their area start popping up, the 2 siblings brush it off for the most part and continue on with their usual lives. That is until after Finn and Gwen try to defend themselves from a bunch of bullies who are beating Finn up. Finn eventually approaches this guy with a black van, who then kidnaps Finn, and now he has to find a way to get out of the grabber's basement. I'm not going to go over the rest of the movie in case you guys want to see it for yourself, but even if it does take a little long to get to the main story, I feel like the setups were necessary enough so that we can understand the rest of the movie better. The villain I thought was pretty interesting too. Unlike other villains in a movie like this, the grabber doesn't really try to torture or hurt Finney. In fact, even providing him food so he doesn't starve to death. Even if he is just providing Finney with a plate of scrambled eggs and lemon soda as his daily meal. Instead, the grabber is more interested in letting the kid torture himself when being surrounded by nothing but brick walls all around him all day. Being beaten up or even threatened is one thing, but I'd argue that pure nothingness is just as much torture as what I can imagine a kid like Finn's age would be in. If you already have seen the movie though, you would know the same strategy used by the grabber would turn out to be a major flaw. All in all, I really like how most of the events taking place in the movie were paced exactly at the right times, and how different it feels compared to other horror movies. I also really like the part where Gwen literally shouts, "Jesus, what the fuck?" Fuck! Probably the funniest thing I've heard in any horror movie ever. And everything else about this movie was pretty alright too. That's all I had to say about this movie because while it is definitely entertaining and good, there's not anything noteworthy to be present. My only issue with this movie has to do with Finn and Gwen's dad. At one part of the movie, he can be seen beating up his own daughter after he found out she was cooperating with the police. And I'll honestly have to say it was definitely the most disturbing part of the movie, so there's your warning for those who are sensitive to domestic violence. And the movie does not try to acknowledge this whatsoever for the rest of it. And I have a feeling the movie was also trying to sympathize with the dad for a bit, which I am definitely not buying. So all around, I'd recommend seeing this movie if you're a horror fan or a movie fan in general like I am. Solid 7 out of 10. As for Elvis, holy cow, this movie was freaking incredible. Before seeing this, I honestly could not care about Elvis whatsoever. I have never listened to a single Elvis song, seen, or followed anything Elvis related. Because quite simply, I just don't care. So I came into this movie expecting nothing more than just 2.5 hours of the movie praising Elvis as the king of music, and while there were definitely parts I feel like the movie overlooked, the cinematography, editing, visual effects, and most of the acting easily are what makes this movie feel so special to begin with. I don't think I've seen a movie put this much effort into all these shots since Everything Everywhere All at Once. And if you've seen that movie, you know that the directors managed to pull off some crazy visual effects with what they had. Now let me just be clear here. I am not a biopic movie kind of guy. Elvis was the only biopic movie I've seen since forever. And while it certainly was entertaining and interesting to see Elvis's life story, it definitely felt like it was ignoring some of his other controversies. All these questionable decisions aside though, the movie really does feel like a telling of Elvis's whole career. The rise, fame, and fall of Presley. Tom Hanks as Colonel, aka Elvis's manager, was also pretty well written as well. And man, the editing! I think you're just gonna have to believe me when I say that this movie's editing with transitions, graphics, and basically everything did not need to go as hard as it did. And if you're anything like me, you'll quickly understand why I think like this. Elvis's performances in this were also pretty lifelike too, and it kinda almost felt like you were in the audience watching him perform on stage. One thing I don't entirely understand is that, especially since this was all taking place in the 1950s or 70s, how even though the movie did acknowledge the fact that Elvis's dance were derived from the black community, he was never called out as such throughout the entire movie, instead just focusing purely on the fact that it was perversion. Man, now that I think about it, the 1950s were just a wild time in general. It's crazy how Elvis was charged and ordered to enter into war, all because of a funny dance move he was doing. If that kind of thing was still punishable today, Robin Thicke and Miley Cyrus would probably be facing life in prison for their VMA performance by now. Even though the soundtrack in this movie does introduce new music from new generations of artists like Doja Cat, Denzel Curry, and for some damn reason Eminem too, it doesn't really take away the illusion that you're seeing a movie take place so many decades ago, since it's not focusing too much on the time period this movie was taking place in, but rather the revolution that Elvis's songs and performance introduced to the music world. I find it insane how Austin Butler, who plays Elvis, not only did a great job at acting as Elvis, but even went as far as singing some of Elvis's tracks as well. The directing that went into this movie was something that I had only seen on very few occasions at this point, and if not for some of the directions parts of this movie ended up taking, this movie is a little bit of a masterpiece regardless. Solid 8 out of 10. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new here. Are you planning to see one or even both of these movies? And if you already have seen at least one of them, what are your thoughts on them? Let me know in the comments below. See ya!